Every year or so I do a video on this, and I just realized I don't have a copy of my old video, so I guess I should do one. Also, at random, I hope this isn't really an important thing. Uh, Several videos popped up in my feed that are about EMP proofing and Faraday cages made out of various materials. Short and sweet. Virtually every single car you can see on the road is invulnerable to EMP. It's not going to get damaged by it. This has been tested to death. If you want to make sure you have a car that isn't going to be affected by EMP, I also recommend you get a car that won't be affected by your other car. Let me explain. Due to the paycheck to paycheck nature of reality and how important the electrical system is, you if you're worried about EMP and prepping and stuff, we should start with the basics. Number one, you should have two vehicles. One vehicle should be literally incapable of breaking down. It doesn't matter if it's a fucking Tesla. It doesn't matter if it's a pedal bike. I don't care, but you have to have something that won't break down. And on that note, buy a bicycle that doesn't break down. Now I know that sounds like some political statement to some of you. To other people, it's a no-brainer. But the thing is, I mean a bike that can't break. This is different. This means you're going to get a bicycle that isn't really all that comfortable or anything, but the tires don't go flat because they're made out of solid material instead of with air in them. No, it doesn't have to be based on an electric motor or a gas engine. It has to be a pedal bike, preferably a 3-speed hub bike with, uh, uh, the kind of brakes that are, coaster brakes, where everything's just built into the thing. The most reliable bicycle is the one with a really expensive rear wheel that requires almost no maintenance, and you just put permanently inflated tires on it. I'm not kidding. Just start with that. Get an old beach cruiser and convert it to the dark side. You just need the rear wheel that has all those abilities and not much else. Put lights on it. Make sure the lights are not visible like reflectors or anything, so you can turn them off if you actually want to have a bug-out bike, which I recommend strongly. Also, if you want to get a dirt bike. These are cheap things you get over time. But as for a real vehicle, get a car that doesn't break down. Just look up the least maintenance, least reliability problem vehicle on the planet. Buy two of them. No, don't buy the snazzy one, the one you think you need, or the one you're going to think of as an investment or whatever. Just get two ridiculously cheap cars. And the reason I'm bringing this up in the world of EMPs, just like the bicycle, bikes aren't affected by EMP. The LED lights might be, so I'm going to tell you how to save yourself some electricity on them. Get another set of lights identical to what you have on the bike, and pull out the batteries and put them inside of a steel container that you can close up tight enough that it's electrically shorted to itself. And make sure that you put your lights inside of a plastic bag. That way the magnetic fields or electrostatic fields or electrical charges or induced EMP, whatever you're worried about, can't go through anything. It'll go around it through the metal. That's what the Faraday cage is. And the inside should be insulated, and that's it. Now, I don't want to hear about how you ground it or don't ground it. It's not relevant, because that has been tested to death, just like the car we're going to talk about. What kind of car? A cheap one that still works, that you don't care if somebody hits it, you have another car at home. Don't rent a car. Don't argue with a person about exchanging insurance information and blah, blah. Just assume the car's dead. Assume it's totaled because you bought it used and it's a hunk of crap, and get another piece of shit car from home. The second car is what you use until the next accident. Just buy two cars that are really, really cheap you can afford instead of one expensive one that you seem to think that you need. I don't care about you talking about it being a business write-off. A car that drops dead at the intersection because it's been hit with an EMP or hit by a Hugo, or worse, a Pinto, isn't really going to do you any good if the damn thing doesn't drive anymore. Your car is transportation to get from point A to point B, and so you can keep showing up for work on time so that isn't used as an excuse to fire you, which will be a bigger disaster than some fucking EMP. And now we get to your best EMP bet. Your spare car that you keep inside of your garage, if you're lucky it's a metal garage, the car itself isn't going to be EMP proofed. It's just that it's not going to be affected by EMP. But you can use the trunk with a big box with all the electronics in it. Now, the idea is that any electronics you have that you need, like a laptop, a cell phone, whatever, get a floating cell phone where you can just pull out a SIM card and put it in, or put it on the account after an EMP blows out your other phone. Just because the phone isn't hit by an EMP doesn't mean you ain't going to drop it in the toilet. But have spare equipment. Make sure it's one where you can pull out the battery. The big problem that happens if you store electronics inside of an EMP-proof container is, number one, they need to be a duplicate of what you have, and number two, very importantly, you can't put the battery in them. Leaving a battery in electronics is asking for it to be dissolved or catch on fire in a confined space. Don't do that. Don't put anything in an EMP-proof box that you can't pull the battery out of. And guess where you put the battery? I'm going to be blunt with you. You put it in another cage, it's a real cage. It's a metal cage with bug screen and then wire cloth around that. And they're, crimped together with copper crimps or whatever. But you put the batteries in there and you make sure that it's insulated on the inside with a plastic tub. And that's it. And you just keep the batteries away from the electronics for storage. And then every couple of months or every 6 months, you cycle the batteries that you are using currently into that and then use the other batteries so that they're continually being used. Otherwise, they just sit there and die after being stored for 2 years, and you've wasted the money out of them. Get some use out of them. Make sure that what we're talking about is the rechargeable batteries. Non-rechargeable batteries, you just buy them every 6 months and go through them. Batteries don't get damaged by EMP as much as people might think. The electronics you have that might be sensitive to this stuff, you're not going to be EMP proofing any of it. You're just going to keep a spare of everything. Anything that requires that it be the only one, like a cell phone or whatever, what you need to have is a spare phone handset. That means you need to have one of these accounts where you can pull out the SIM card. Hopefully when you pull the SIM card out, it'll be fine. And the rest of the stuff that you have, unless it's electronic, something oversensitive, you don't have to worry about it. Now we're going to get to medical equipment. No, if you have a pacemaker or any other internally mounted biologically compatible electronics that you have to use to stay alive or stay healthy or avert some horrible problem or avert some annoying problem. Let's say you have a type of diabetes where you need to have an insulin pump, but it's not the end of the world. You can get away with not having it working. Just make sure you have the spare equipment available and make sure you understand that it's probably not going to be affected. Next, EMPs do not happen often enough for anybody to bring this up. But I'm seeing, when I just sort by time and date stamp, people talking about EMP and Faraday cages way too much. Now, if you live really close to the North Pole or South Pole for some reason, or if you see Aurora Borealis on a very regular basis every single year, yeah, okay. If you see Northern Lights, you're in an area where you'll be kind of a focal point for, let's say, solar storms, or an actual EMP from an atom bomb or whatever. But the other thing is, EMP doesn't mean nuclear bomb or solar storm. It can mean lightning. The same method for making your house safe from lightning will make the house itself and you safe from EMP and or solar storms or whatever most of the time. So let's do the second best one. Make sure your house has proper wiring and make sure none of the wiring is out of specification. Remove all the excess wiring in the building that you don't actually have to have, that's just sitting there, that's just straight sections of wire. Get rid of it. Look into making sure that the electrical system and your water pipes and sewer pipes are all properly grounded to earth. And make sure that you're not going to get any corrosion. In fact, instead of worrying about the subject you looked up this video for, if you actually would bother looking at this video, make sure that the place you live and the life you lead has the least amount of crap wrong with it you have to deal with, because that is important. If the electrical grid goes down, just make sure that you have food that doesn't require refrigeration or cooking, because the electrical system's out. You're not worried about losing your comms or radio communications or your ham radio or CB radio. You're worried about can you cook an egg? Maybe you should make it to where you don't have to cook or freeze anything. You'll have to make sure you accommodate for that. And here's a rule that I should give out. If you are holding lots of food backup food. Let's say you're homesteading or you're a prepper or a survivalist like I used to be. The first thing you do during a catastrophe is get all of the perishable food to everybody else outside of your family as well. Because it's going to go bad in a week or so. Either turn it into preserves immediately or share it with your neighbors so that they know that you're giving them every bit of food that you can so that everybody's fed so they won't eat their canned food really quickly. Eat all the perishables first. Throw a picnic. It's good for morale. Don't be like they show in the movies where people get paranoid and act like a nutcase you would never, ever, ever resuscitate. Don't be that person that I won't help, because I won't help you. Make sure you help everyone in the area that's starving. A hungry person is extremely dangerous to everybody. Period. No, really, learn. Learn to be a survivalist instead of a fucking prepper. No joke. I have a negative opinion of preppers, but then again, I am one. I just hate that. I grew up being more of a survivalist, and I was one of those people that looked down on preppers. But it's the same thing. That's why I just fuse them all together. And that's the thing. Unless you are an antisocial jackass, the first thing in your mind is make sure everybody's fed, make sure everybody's safe, make sure everybody's calmed down to where they're not desperate. Because if they're desperate, they're dangerous. So again, if you're looking up how to EMP-proof your equipment, again, put it into a plastic bag with the batteries pulled. Make sure it's the duplicate of the one you use on a regular basis. Swap them around every 6 months. Even up the wear and tear on them. If something goes bad, get it repaired, replaced. Make sure everything you have is electrically sound and checked and tested. Make sure you have 2 of everything if it's really important to you. And if it isn't really important to you, don't worry it. Store the batteries separate from the equipment in a separate container. A more aired out one for the batteries. Make sure everything's kept at the temperature that it needs to be. Don't leave it in the trunk or the garage unless that's really going to work well for it. And above all, when it comes to electronics and EMPs and solar storms and whatever, basically, you don't have to worry. Most equipment, because it's going to be tested for this by somebody, has been tested that way. And there's no reason for people making cell phones to not make them EMP-proof. There isn't. Having your cell phone in your pocket while you're working at a place that does metal smelting by induction, that's about as bad as an EMP could get. Having people who work in that industry find out that a specific brand of phone always fails at work means that that company is going to look bad. So they're going to make sure it works well. You'd be surprised how much equipment is just accidentally EMP-proof or deliberately. And this is the funny thing I see in these videos that they don't get. Virtually all electronic equipment that says that it's for radio frequency purposes, communications equipment, or that uses high frequency, is by nature going to be shielded to the point that it's EMP-proof because it has to. And since most cars especially have to have a bunch of radio frequency computer gadgets in them, they tend to be EMP shielded just because that's just the way they have to do it or they won't work. Anyway, tests. Very, very old cars have almost no problem with EMP. Newer cars have minor problems like something will stop working correctly, but the car will still run. You'll still be able to turn on the lights. You'll still be able to get down the road. But if you are worried about it, if you have a car with LEDs, make sure you have a spare set of LEDs wrapped in a plastic bag and stuffed into a metal box. You can even leave the metal box in the trunk. That's not going to hurt a damn thing. And no, you don't have to worry about if it's grounded or not. Yes, someone's going to bring that up. It's not relevant. Tests have shown that that's not really important. It improves survivability 0.1% or something like that. This is not important. Knock it off. Next. There is no next. Basically keep spares of everything, duplicates of everything, and separate the batteries from the equipment most of the time. And if you can't separate the battery from something, please don't store it. So, not much advice here. Probably just wasted 14, 15 minutes of your life. But then again, I just spent the last hour or so looking up all these videos and having people basically trying to sell you something. This is free. It's worth every penny. But you can look up studies like this. I'm not even going to include any links, just because nobody ever reads them or looks them up, apparently. But if you want to, you can look up EMP debunked. That's it. Or EMP myths. And you'll find a bunch of people selling you something. If they're selling you something, immediately hit the back button and go find another article. That's it. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.